Oh, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in to Snow the Goalie, the Only Flyers podcast, the People's podcast, the Prognosticators podcast, the Pedialyte podcast. Listen, the Only Flyers podcast, we know this. It's true. It is undisputed. We are here. We are trying something new today. We hope that you enjoy it. We've gotten some feedback in recent weeks about how, man, it would be great if the audio quality or if the video quality over on the YouTube channel, over on the Crossing Broad YouTube channel were better. So guess what? We're here. We listened. We're now using Riverside. We're hoping that this is going to be good. We hope that it's going to sound great. It's going to look great over on the YouTube channel. And more than anything, we get to now look at the handsome mugs of Anthony Sanfilippo and Chris Therien. So there's a lot to get into today. Gentlemen, let's just start. Bundy, I don't know if you want to say what you thought when you saw Ant today, or if that's going to be an off-air thing, but for a guy that I've called Rob Blagojevich before, I figured that, if you wanted to take your barbs at Ant, now's your time.
Let's just, you know what? I think Ant looks good. He's a good friend, and you know what? To each his own. I did that to myself one time too, and they asked me if I'd like to become a character in a Star Wars movie. But other than that, I think he looks great.
I'd rather do G.I. Joe.
And you know what, dude? It's cool. And you know what? You don't have to dry anything when you get out of the shower,
That's right. That's great. It's that time of year.
And you're loved, so who cares?
But here's the thing. I'm flying to. So we didn't announce this on the show, but Maria and I are flying to Las Vegas tonight.
Nice.
For the next. We're going to be there for the next 5 days. It's 95 degrees in Vegas. Like, let's take it all off, man. Just kind of be sitting out there by the pool.
Don't tell us about your nighttime exploits. All right? Oh, you meant your hair. Got it. Okay. Got it.
I was waving at my head.
Let your hair down and hang out for the weekend.
That's right. It'll be great.
I like that Ant is acting like he was, follically gifted leading into this. Like he had a luscious, Yager-esque mane of hair. But listen, we're excited for today. Make sure if for whatever reason, if you're listening to the podcast and you don't already, subscribe or follow, make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, everywhere that there are podcasts. Look for Snow the Goalie. Remind you that you can listen to us hands-free with any Google Home device or any Amazon device. Even with Siri, you can ask to play the newest episode of Snow the Goalie Flyers podcast, and bingo, bango, bongo, you get the newest episode. And like I said before, youtube.com/crossingbroad, you can find the Snow the Goalie channel on that channel. We're excited. There's a lot to get into today. Guys, I feel like we touched on this last week. I'm not saying that we're responsible for this, obviously. We're not. But last week we talked about, what happens if the Flyers ultimately opt to sit Keith Yandle and to break the Ironman streak. And then it was like, the next day, the report came out that, it's a realistic possibility, could very well happen. Then I saw Ant went into Twitter, into our Snow the Goalie community, which, by the way, if you follow us on Twitter, at Snow the Goalie, or at Ant Sanphilly, at CTerrian6, at Joy on Broad, you can find, I think we've all at some point quote tweeted or retweeted the Flyers community that we have, the Snow the Goalie community on Twitter. And Ant, just for funsies, decided that he was going to go into the community and share, I think it was 2 hours before any of the other writers picked it up.
Yeah, it wasn't that long. It was like 50. It was like 50 minutes.
It was 50 minutes before you put it out publicly, but it was 2 hours before some of the other reporters went out and reported it. But Ant, just for fun, decided to flex on everyone. So in the Snow the Goalie community, he shared, I think it was like 9 a.m., maybe a little bit earlier, that the indications were that Keith Yandle was going to be sat. Less than an hour later, he goes on Twitter and tweets it out. And then like an hour after that, the people who went down to talk to Mike Yeo in Voorhees put it out, because better late than never, right? So, guys, I know that there's been a lot surrounding this, and I think a lot of the things that we kind of predicted would happen in terms of outrage and how the community was going to react, the hockey community was going to react, kind of came to fruition. So, Bundy, let me throw this to you first as the former player. Are you surprised, one, that the Flyers sat Keith Yandle, but two, are you surprised by the vast contrast, the stark contrast between the two camps once again in reacting to what happened here with Keith Yandle and who's to blame for him sitting?
Yeah, I mean, it's stark, the contrast, and I know we've talked about it before, and we'll give you some examples of that. I'm more one. I'm the guy, the believer that the club is the one that has to make this decision. I know it's a long streak, but you wonder, when you hear some of the things that go on, how many games were manufactured over this time, it's really hard to play that many games in a stretch. And I know, like, one guy that we will talk about after is Mike Rupp, but there are different guys saying things. Like Jeremy Roenick has one thing that says he's totally disgusted with the Flyers for what they did. And there's guys privately I've talked to, but I would say most likely, I would say 8 out of 10 of them were like, yeah, I mean, you have to earn the right to stay in the lineup, and you have to be a solid player. First of all, numbers, Yandel's numbers were just pathetic, right? Like, as bad as you'll ever find for a defenseman at that stretch. Minus 39, I think, when they pulled him at the time. I know he might have been a couple minuses when he got back in the lineup the other night. But, I'm a guy that believed that no matter how you performed, you had to earn your right to stay in the lineup. And I'm not saying that he didn't. I'm just saying, though, that in a lot of ways, I think that these things, when Chuck signed Keith Yandel, my issue is not with Keith Yandel being on this team or playing here this year or playing somewhere else next year or even the year after that. My problem was that you were committed to playing the guy for 50-some games when he couldn't even get in the playoffs in Florida last year. So if you're the general manager, you got to be forward-thinking in a sense, saying to yourself, like, okay, how is this guy? Because he's going to be one of my 6 every single night for 50-some games until this record's broken. And, by the way, we still got Phil Kessel, who's chugging down his back like 15 games behind him. See, that has to mean something. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, Keith Yandel's streak doesn't mean anything anymore. Yeah, Kessel will finish off the year in Arizona on a bad team. Somebody will sign him next year, and he'll play 6 games, and no one will ever talk about a streak again. Phil Kessel will have that record like Doug Jarvis for the next 40 years until someone breaks it. So if you're going to play the guy and bring him in, play him all the way. Be as god-awful as you've been to this point, and let him move on if that's what your thinking was. Getting him out of the lineup to look at kids was the right thing to do. You have got to see what you have in your system. Ronnie Adder, giving York more power play minutes. Those are the decisions that you have to make for the betterment of the Philadelphia Flyers. And to be quite honest with you guys, they haven't done much for the betterment of the Philadelphia Flyers all year. This is probably one of the positive moves they've made, and dropping a hammer and saying, hey, we need to start moving forward and looking forward here, because what we did just this year was it was as pathetic a season as you'd ever find, from the pieces put in place to all the charades that we've seen in the building this year, guys. So that's where I'm at on it. No one ever did me any favors when I played. I believed I earned my time. I got scratch games when I should have. I went through the natural progression. I played every single playoff game that was available to me to play. But that's a lot of games by Keith Yandel. I commend him for that. I know he's a great guy and a great person. But I'll be honest with you guys, the talk of the streak was over as soon as that hockey game was over from most sides. It was talk because of the Flyers pulled them out. That's life. I mean, that's life. There's no participation trophies, and in reality, there's not. You can give them out, but the bottom line is that you've got to earn your time and you got to earn your professionalism playing in that league. And minus 39, there is nothing that suggested to this point that he should have even been in the lineup at all that far. And I think that's pretty much the fairest analysis I could give. Nothing to do with the person at all. It's everything to do with the player and where the organization's at in this period of time.
Yeah, and I tend to agree completely here, Russ. There's some people who say, well, why didn't you pull him out sooner? I mean, let him set the record and then pull him out. Well, there's 2 things at play here. One, they did want to see him be able to hold on to the record for as long as he could. Obviously, Kessel's really close, right? So they assured it got to a point where Kessel couldn't catch him this season. I mean, who knows if Kessel signs anywhere next year? He may not. I mean, he's not particularly a guy you want in your lineup. I mean, he's not like the picture of health when you look at the guy out there.
Someone will sign him.
And it could be the Philadelphia Flyers. Does he have Chuck Fletcher's number?
Could be. Yeah, who knows?
He'll break the record.
But secondly, but more importantly, up until the time that it happened, the Flyers did not have a prospect type player to bring into the lineup to replace Keith Yandel. So what would have been the point of pulling him sooner? You made the commitment to him. It was probably not the right decision at the beginning of the year. But again, when he signed, you're looking at who was out there. I mean, and you see they did sign after the fact. They did bring in Sealer. They did bring in Connaughton off of waivers. I mean, those were the kind of defensemen you're looking at, right? So if it wasn't Keith Yandel, it was probably Nick Seeler for the whole year, or probably Kevin Connaughton for more time than it would have been Yandel. So they didn't really have anybody else to put in that spot. And, you know, you can blame the organization for that 100%, right? There's no question. But the fact of the matter is that once he's there, you don't take him out until you have somebody that you want to see replace him, which it was when Ronnie Adder gets signed. Then they have somebody to put in, and now it makes perfect sense.
And you know the other thing to that, Anthony, just to add to it a little bit, guys, was also when your team is dipping like it was, like kind of had an okay start, but then when the train goes off the tracks or the wheels go off the car, everything happens so fast, and you're not thinking enough. Like, how can we change the lineup? We're just going to keep going with what we know. And I think that's another part where you know the same players get thrust back in the lineup night after night. And I think the Flyers got caught in that a little bit also this year.
Yeah.
So it's interesting enough how that works out sometimes.
Just in case anybody thinks that we're like living in our own echo chamber, I want to bring in the clip of Mike Rupp, who, you know, I think said a lot of the same kind of things that we had said, and some of the things that, you know, we very clearly were kind of the same thought process on. So I want to play this real quick for the people who are watching and who are listening, just to give you an idea of somebody else's perspective on this before we take the other side into consideration. So here we go. That should do it. That doesn't look like it's showing up. Uh-oh. Good old Russ and his technology. You know what it was? I tried to do full screen, guys. And you know what? I learned my lesson. I learned my lesson about tech, but here it is. This will work. Because this worked before. Maybe not. There it goes. It didn't work again. That's fine. Listen, what can I do, guys? What can I do to make this up?
You practiced this. And usually I give you grief because you don't normally practice with this stuff beforehand. And this time you actually did. You actually played it for us before we started.
Oh, I'm an idiot. I'm an idiot. This is the one. I hit the wrong thing. Here we go. Sorry, guys. That should... You can see that, I assume? Here we go. All right.
Hey, everybody. Hopefully you're having a great weekend. I just wanted to chime in on something. I know that's in the hockey world right now. A hot topic is the Philadelphia Flyers deciding to scratch Keith Yandel. Let's remove the player's name from the equation because I just want to talk about the circumstance because from my interactions with Keith Yandel and everybody I've ever talked to loves this guy. Great teammate, great human being. But we got to stop finessing and manufacturing and fabricating things to get records. Like, how many times do we have to see this happen? I mean, honestly, Keith Yandel was supposed to get scratched when he was in Florida. And the whole internet blew up and was losing their minds about it and almost kind of like guilted this organization in Florida to keep it going. And then he got the record. And here we are in a situation. You can't tell me the best thing for the Flyers right now is if he is not playing well, he shouldn't be in the lineup, especially when they need to play 15 in these 15 games, the kids, right? And that's even – so if this thing – and it looks like it's coming to an end, looks like Phil Kessel's next line. Phil's streak should have ended. They fabricated, manufactured. They flew him home, got a charter flight for him to fly – where was it, Chicago? Was that where the game was? He played one shift, flew home, kept the streak alive. Why are we doing this? These records weren't set that same way. Doug Jarvis, I don't think, did anything like that. Gary Unger, I don't think, did anything like that. We're discrediting the history of the game by doing these types of things. So all the people that are saying this is a trash move by a trash organization in Philly, I completely disagree. They're doing what's best for them. They've got to smoke out what some of their defensemen, some of their younger players can do at this time. It would be a joke if they did it the other way. So, anyways,
So there you go. It's not just us. But he did allude to the fact that there are other people in the sport and maybe, you know, former players who are just as upset about it. And so I'm going to go to somebody who we all know, somebody who's been on this show before, somebody who's popular in this city, and that's Jeremy Roenick. I want to bring up his tweet really quick because I think he's usually spot on with a decent number of takes, but this one I think he got horribly, horribly wrong. So Roenick's tweet is, for those who are listening, I never thought I'd be this disappointed in the Flyers, one of my favorite teams ever. Scratching Yandel is beyond disrespectful and sends the wrong message of loyalty to the players and fans of the NHL. The team is not making the playoffs. What's the message here? Mike Yeo, you should be ashamed. What Keith Yandel has accomplished is truly remarkable, and to take that away from him, what free agent would ever want to play for Mike Yeo now? The team is trying to rebuild, and you pull a move like this. Truly unbelievable. I'm very disappointed to be a Flyers fan right now. That's a lot. Go ahead.
Well, my biggest issue with this is him throwing this at the feet of Mike Yeo.
Mm-hmm.
Like this isn't Yossi's. I mean, ultimately, it's his call to make the lineup change. But that meeting was held in the morning between Chuck Fletcher and Keith Yandel. Let's get it straight. I mean, the general manager and the player talked about this, and the general manager told him he's coming out of the lineup because they need to see young players. The general manager is telling the interim coach, Mike Yeo, we want to see younger players play, so you got to put Ronnie Attard in, and somebody's going to have to come out. It'll probably be Yandel because we want to see Sealer without Yandel because we might think about potentially bringing him back as a number 7, number 8 guy next year. Again, remember, flat cap, right? So you can't really have you can't really be expecting like your depth guys to be any more than what they really are now. I mean, you got to. It's guys making this kind of salary. It's borderline NHL talent, mostly AHL talent, right? So that's who these guys are. So maybe they want to see Sealer without Yandel and say, okay, can he play without Yandel as his partner? So that's it. I mean, that was the thing between the general manager and the player. It had nothing to do with Mike Yeo. So to throw Mike Yeo under the bus, JR, you missed that. Yeah. That's a swing and a miss, my friend.
There's another part to this too, right? Like even if you were going to be misguided and say it was Mike Yeo's fault, who gives a shit? Mike Yeo's not going to be here after this year, right? Unless he is like the ultimate blankie to Chuck Fletcher, like unless he is the teddy bear that he cuddles at night, right? Like
Stop it.
The proverbial. Hold on, Anthony. I'm not saying that there's an illicit affair going on here between.
No, I'm not saying that either. But what I'm saying is that
Mike Yeo's not going to be here, so it's not even.
No, but he might be.
He
might be as an assistant coach.
Jesus,
he might be here as an assistant coach. Seriously,
he might, Ross.
I don't think Mike Yeo's a bad coach. Let me get that out of the way. I don't think Mike Yeo's a bad coach. I don't think Mike Yeo would be a bad assistant coach. But Mike Yeo is not going to be the head coach of this team next year.
Correct. He's not going to be the head coach, but he could be an assistant here. So to say he's not going to be here next year is a little disingenuous. That's all.
Okay. That's why I clarified as the head coach.
That
was the clarification.
Right. Yeah. Let me say something about JR first, Russ. I love JR. He was an unbelievable teammate. One of my favorite people in hockey. Yeah, he doesn't like Mike Yeo, but he was broadcasting too, and he didn't like Patrick Marleau very much, and he made that pretty clear on national TV. So, I know one thing about JR: if he's got a gripe with somebody, he's not afraid to lay it out there, and that sounds like it almost sounds like an old junior beef or something, with Mike Yeo. But again, and JR is entitled to that, to his opinion on that. We were just trying to show you guys there are varying opinions of this. Mm-hmm. But I think most of them, at the end of the day, favor the team, Anthony, and the Flyers making the right call. I'm with the Flyers on this one. Keith Yandel broke the record. They carried him to that part. So I don't, and if there was no Phil Kessel behind him, we wouldn't even be talking about this.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
It would be no discussion at all. If he set the record, they scratched him the next night.
But nobody was saying
the
word.
And there was no Phil Kessel. Someone was at 400 games. We'd be like, great. Let's see what happens to that guy in the next 500 games.
Exactly.
It's only because that's Kessel. Why we're even talking about it, because there is a Phil Kessel that exists.
And what Mike Rupp said, what they did, and we didn't even describe it, but fans might not even know. Phil Kessel's wife was about to give birth, and they wanted him to keep his streak going. So rather than have him, miss the game and end the streak, they chartered him a plane, flew him to Chicago. He took one shift and got right back on that charter plane to go back to Arizona to be with his wife for the birth of their child. Now, I get it. You want to be at the birth of your kid. That's great. That's awesome. That's really kind of a cool thing.
You should.
But You should be there.
You should.
But should you keep the
I missed
streak?
one game.
Should you keep the streak alive because of because you're going to, if you were to miss a game because of the birth of your kid, isn't that fair enough? Isn't that does Phil Kessel need his name in the history books as being a guy who sets a record? And then people say, yeah, but you know what he did once? You know what I'm saying? That's always going to be there. That's always going to be
somebody
the
wants him to
asterisk.
have that.
Somebody
wants him to have that record.
Yeah. I want to really quick, before we get into a little bit more about this, I want to bring up the clip of Keith Yandle addressing this, because I think he handled it well. But let's just take a real quick second here to hear from Keith Yandle about being a healthy scratch and ending the Ironman streak.
Chuck, it filled me in, and what's going to happen. And one of those things, you're finding young guys who get the age out of college that they're going to give them a chance to play, and you got to respect that out of the business side of it, and what we're trying to do here, and I think for me, it's just continue to come to the rink, help young guys out, be a good teammate, be here. Like I said, it's tough to have a bad day in the NHL. Obviously, get to do what they can all play, and it's not week one a year, and that's every single guy. Every guy wants to be playing, wants to be on the ice, want to battle with their teammates. But once you're on the ice, you feel like a kid again. Smiling, having fun around. I talked to Chuck. Obviously, they filled me in, and what's going to happen. It's kind of one of those things.
I got looped. There we go. So, guys, I think he handled that about as well as you possibly could have, given the circumstances. And, it's important to point out here, I think, to people that the rumblings and the whispers that any of us typically would get from guys in the locker room or around the locker room, if Keith Yandle had been a horrific malcontent for the better part of the season, I don't think that we would be approaching this the same way either. There was a report that he had expressed to the organization a willingness to express to a team that might want to acquire him, a playoff team that might want to acquire him, that they are not required to maintain the Ironman streak, that they could sit him. He didn't want it to be a distraction. But there are two things there. One, it's really hard to know if that was true, right? That could just be a little bit of saving face. But the bigger issue, obviously, is what playoff team was going to want Keith Yandle at this point? Unless it really is to just be, a number 7 defenseman that you could bring in an emergency situation, and really there isn't much of a reason to play him. I can't imagine why a playoff team would have considered going after him. Maybe it was just, he knew that the season was up here, this was going nowhere, and you try to chase a cup one more time. I don't know. But I am kind of surprised by the number of people who I think tried to vilify the Flyers for this decision. And at the same time, I also thought it was kind of sad to see so many people shitting on Keith Yandle for wanting to keep his streak alive as long as he possibly could. I don't know what's happened. I think it's just the toxicity that surrounds this team and the fan base and how divided this fan base is. But you can have two things. You can, one, be kind of happy for the guy that he broke the record, and then at the same time, you can also step back and say, the team did what's best for the team, and they were under no obligation to continue this streak. The idea of getting this to 1,000 games, I think, is the most maddening part of it. That, the Flyers screwed him over because he could have gotten to 1,000 consecutive. That's a meaningless number at this point. You know what I mean? It's not the same thing as Claude Giroux playing his 1,000th game for the same team. He'll get to 1,000 games, maybe, if somebody signs him next year, right? But, that, at some point, the onus is no longer on the organization to continue to hamper their own product and to prevent their younger guys from playing, just to keep a meaningless number going, after they've already given him the chance to break the record in the first place.
Can I say something, guys? And I'll be honest with you, it's actually an interesting point you just brought up, Russ, and I just think it as a player. If there was any kind of wiggle room for the player in this, right? So obviously Keith Yandel had his say in a lot of stuff leading up to that, to breaking the record. What I would have done, and what would have been more important for me, I would have been trying to get the 1,000 games rather than the streak. So I would have said to the Flyers, if I'm healthy, you guys can scratch me when you feel necessary, but if you're going to play me, get me to 1,000 games, however that the games appear, whether there's 2 in a row, a scratch, 5 more in a row, a couple of games missed. Just play me like the 6th or 7th guy. Games you need me more in a power play. But that would have been my goal, to try to get to the 1,000 games more so than the streak. So it's an interesting, just a concept, the way you're talking about it, because that might have been something there. I don't know. Because that, to me, I'm just telling you from my standpoint, guys, I would have rather had the 1,000-game mantra than a streak that's probably going to get broken anyway, and he may not get to 1,000 games, right?
Yeah, well, the problem is that, like, I think even if you were to go into that, I think it's a really good point, and I think it's a great idea. I think the problem that you run into in that scenario is there's nothing to hold the Flyers accountable to that, right? Unless you're going to go out and publicly burn them, which you're not going to do. Like, there is an inherent public pressure to get this guy in the lineup to pursue that Ironman streak. And just like for the sake of making sure that we're kind of clear on this one too, he has played in 1,100 games in his career. So it's not that it was 1,000 career games. It was just that idea of getting to 1,000 with the Ironman streak. So, it's just, again, it is difficult. But the only way for him to get to that 1,000 Ironman streak was for them to effectively play him the rest of the season. And it just didn't make sense to do it. So I don't want to go back to the Claude Giroux thing, but this is why I think, once again, we've entered this weird – there's this weird dichotomy between people who are happy to see the team get what's best or do what's best for the team long term versus the fans who are all in on whatever happens for the player. And, like, we saw it with the Giroux situation. I think we kind of saw it here with the Yandel situation. It's like, unfortunately, you can't have it both ways. Keith Yandel isn't a good enough player to keep in the lineup. If he were decent, or if he were even like a number 4/5 instead of a 6 or 7, or some might argue an 8, then he would be in the lineup. They wouldn't be scratching him for Ronnie Adams. They wouldn't. But he's not good. And I'm not saying Nick Seeler is good by any stretch, but you at least can take a look at what Nick Seeler might be in a different situation. You don't want to move on from a guy, think that he's garbage, or think that he's not very good at all, and then he goes on and he blossoms somewhere else. And the reason you didn't get to take a look at him is because you decided to keep Keith Yandel in your lineup when there's no long-term future here. And you've been kind of quiet on Keith here and the Flyers fans. Is there anything that you want to add to this before we move on, or have we talked it out?
No, I think that's exactly. I mean, I think we've hit the nail on the head. I mean, the Flyers did what was right by them. They did what was right by the player for as long as they could, and then it was like, listen, we have to put the team ahead of you now, and it was the right thing to do. And that's all there is to it. I mean, I don't look at it any more or less than that. And I think Bundy's most prescient point today was if there was no Phil Kessel, this wouldn't even be a conversation. I agree. Totally. And that's the biggest part of it. Yep. You know, that's the biggest part. The one thing I will say, though, I mean, with an opportunity to look at some of the young players, I mean, I don't know how much of the games you guys have been watching. I mean, Adder's made a couple mistakes. Obviously, you don't expect him to be, a superstar right off the bat. But I like what I'm seeing from some of these younger kids. Noah Cates had a nice little game the other night. Owen Tippett, man, he hasn't scored. He's got one goal, but I mean, holy cow, he hits the pipe. He gets breakaways. He can skate. I mean, there's some young players here that you got to sit there and say they could be something. There might be something here.
Bunny, that's got to be a good feeling, right?
Goals as Drew, right? He's got as many goals for the Flyers as Drew had for Florida. So it's an even trade, guys. The Flyers are winning it.
It has to be a good feeling, though, for the organization, right? Like, yes, he's not finding the back of the net, but he's a player that it looks like right now fans can get behind. and you're not left with a lottery ticket, right? Like, you're not left with a pick that will convey 2 years from now. You actually have something tangible that you can watch and that you can start to throw some support behind. He's been all over the place, and it is nice to see a guy who's willing to shoot the puck and put some weight behind it. So, yeah, you gotta like Owen Tippett. Well behind
I think Morgan Frost has played some of his best hockey of late. Maybe not the third period the other night, but other than that, I thought like for the last 5 or 6 games, he's been excellent. So it's nice to see like his games start. Maybe he's starting to figure something out. Who knows? I mean, it's just like it gives them at least something to think about. And if you're going to use these guys as assets that you're going to move as part of off-season transactions, it at least gives other teams something to think about too. Say, well, maybe that guy is worth a flyer. Maybe that guy is worth adding into this deal. Whatever the case might be. I think that there's some benefit there, especially in these games that are really meaningless at this point in the season.
Bundy, is that part of the frustration? Like that.
Say that again, Russ.
Is that part of the frustration here? Like, we obviously know that there are people who are in the rebuild camp and the retool camp. That, like, yes, it is good to see Morgan Frost potentially like rehab his trade value, but at the same time, like, isn't it kind of frustrating in that like this team seemingly wants to go the retool route instead of like you could theoretically go into next year, not with the full bottom out. I know Ant hates the bottom out, but like you could go into that season letting Morgan Frost and an Owen Tippett and continue Farabee, put Allison in, maybe get Lachinsky up, and like get some of these younger guys actual meaningful NHL minutes in a season that has no pressure, right? Like if you go into it as a bad team. There's no pressure. Sure, losing can be toxic and all that, but like you can actually give them an opportunity to play an NHL season with no real expectations or pressure on them. I look at it and I say, I wish that's what we could do. And this is a no-pressure situation right now, and they're flourishing. It almost makes me feel like this is the sample that you need to see this should be what you do next year.
Be careful with that, though, Russ, because, what can happen is you can kind of reframe your excitement. I'm not saying you, but the fans, what I don't want them to say is, hey, we got a whole new turnover, and it's Owen Tippett and Morgan Frost, and, a couple of young defensemen have come in. The other thing you have to be vigilant of is that, yes, they're young still, and we don't really know if they're proven commodities to what level, right? So they may not – there's probably guys here that are playing in the NHL right now that'll never be NHL players. I mean – we just had a kid up here, Hayden Hodgins, who went back to the minors, right? Mm-hmm. And, he was a 27-year-old, got a chance late. A coach really liked them. But those are the cases you don't want to get too many of them in your lineup where they're really not NHLers. And you can get yourself caught in kind of a viewing bubble saying, oh, is this the future? It's not. But I agree with you 100% that you have to just let them go play, right? Like just roll the dice, say, guys, this is what we have right now. We're going to have some guys, healthy players back, hopefully Couturier. I don't want to talk about Ellis until we actually see him on the ice, and to some capacity. But, we're going to have healthy guys back. We got some veterans. But the young guys, we want you to take a big bite of the apple. To me, anybody can compete hard with or play, look good if you're competing hard, you're doing things. You maybe can't account for the goals or the skill plays that are involved with some of these young guys. But I agree. This next year, I don't even care. I think the fan base would be actually I think they'd be almost relieved to a sense if someone said, we're going to rebuild. And then take some pressure off of everybody. Let the kids do it. And then I know they said they were rebuilding 7 years ago. It didn't work out. But if you have to retool, I don't like the word retool. I'm a rebuilder at this point because they've retooled already for too long and it hasn't worked. So, yes, play the kids. Let them go out and make mistakes. The fans will get behind that because you're trying to do it. The Rangers did it, and look at where they are. It didn't even take them as long as they thought. So, I think that this has been a really miserable couple of years for the team, guys. But I agree with them. Just let these guys go out and play and see what you got.
I almost wonder if you go into that low to no expectation season, if you're able to not rehab the value of some of your vets that you'd like to move, but like I don't see a scenario where James Van Riemsdyk gets moved this offseason without having to attach something of significance or take back an almost equally bad contract. It almost makes sense to me that you go into next year, you put Van Riemsdyk in a top 6 role, even though he's not a top 6 forward, but you put him in enough positions to be successful that he pots a few goals, and then maybe you're able to sell a team on him. I see Ant shaking his head.
That'll piss the fans off. Yeah.
No.
Nope.
No. He's not here next year. No. They will buy that. If they can't move him, They will buy out that contract. I mean,
Or they'll set up a GoFundMe.
Yeah. I
Please
mean,
help
you can't.
Comcast.
You can't skate around with one hand on your stick the entire career. I mean, you just people say all the time that he could tie a water balloon to the front of his jersey and it won't pop by the end of the game. I mean, that's it's unbelievable. Just you got to get out of that contract. You just got to get out of it. His game, he'll score some goals. Somebody will sign him at a much lower number, and he'll be a third, fourth line guy who plays on the power play and get you 15, 20 goals, and that's great. That's not what they need here.
All right. Before we head out, there is there's a big announcement. We've been kind of tiptoeing around it. We've been flirting with it. Bundy, you've got something going on.
I would first of all, before I say this, I would like to thank my great friends at NBC Sports Philadelphia for the great lessons I've learned from the professionals over there, which have led me to my next venture, which I'm very proud to announce. Let me tell you, first of all, how this whole thing happened. I get a call about a month ago from a gentleman named Charlie Nama. And he says, "How are you doing, Chris? My name's Charlie Nama, and I'm from a good friend of Joe Watson's from Smithers, British Columbia." I said, "Joe Watson from Smithers, British Columbia?" I said, "I know a Joe Watson from Smithers, British Columbia." So he says, "Listen," he says, "I'm looking for a broadcaster for an event I have coming up or a series of events coming up." And Joe Watson says, "I got a guy for you. He did a great job here, and he'd do a great job for you too." So as announced last week, there was something on the Pat McAfee show and the Netflix special that goes back to last year with the Danbury Thrashers. But I will be broadcasting the newly revamped International Ice Wars. We'll get you the information here, guys. Let me get my glasses on. But this will take place in Edmonton. It's going to be a combination of so-called pro and semi-pro ice fighters. And one thing I know Anthony knows, and Russ, going back 30, 40, 50 years, everybody wanted to know who the toughest guy on the ice always was. And that happened in the 80s and 90s. It was never me, I can tell you that. And I can tell you that someone said, "Well, how do you know broadcasting fights?" And I said to Johnny LeClaire the other day, we were talking, I said, "Well, we've seen thousands of them. I certainly have had my eyes on enough fights up front in Philadelphia with some of the guys that I played with." So I will be broadcasting with a conglomerate of guys, International Ice Wars. The first show will be in Edmonton on May 21st. Charlie set it up. The Galante family from Danbury is very much behind it. They had that hit Netflix show. What was he? I think I'd love to try to get him on. But these guys are so much fun, guys. I look at it a little bit like a wrestling, Russ, which I know you're into, and some sports entertainment. But everybody wants to find out who the toughest dog is in the lot. And we're going to find out starting the first of 4 series in Edmonton on May 21st. And I'm pretty excited about it. It's pretty cool. It's a new venture, and I really looking forward to the opportunity of meeting some guys and getting back into the hockey world, certainly in a place like Edmonton to start. Go ahead, boys.
Well, when you first told me about it a while ago, I was very excited for the prospect. And then last week I get a call from Ant, and Ant is over the moon. I mean, I don't know if I've ever heard him as happy as I did when he started talking about this. So anything that can make Anthony smile is certainly worth the price of admission. So, Ant, what are your thoughts on this going in? And do you have a fighter picked?
Well, I mean, I think we could say this. Like, one of the fighters is somebody very familiar. One of the fighters in the first event in Edmonton, Bundy, is somebody very familiar to Philadelphia. Is this correct?
Is it Frank? Frank?
Yeah, that's what
Frank
I think.
He's a judge, I think. He's a judge.
Oh, he's a judge. Is that what he is? Okay.
Yeah, but there is a Philadelphia flair. And Dave McIsaac, who's a longtime Philadelphia fan,
yes.
And the guy still lives in the area here, he's involved with the Danbury Thrashers. So the Netflix special last year kind of set everything up because everybody saw it. Everybody was watching it. I mean, you had a 17-year-old general manager, and they were bringing – and actually Mike Rupp was part of that special, right, that we showed earlier.
Yes, he was.
He was one of the NHLers that wasn't played. Quick story about this. In 2004, we're out playing pickup hockey now, during the lockout. And some guy comes up to a bunch of us on the ice and said, "Hey, if anybody wants to come up and make a few $1,000s and play for the Danbury Thrashers tonight, come on up." And I'm like, "What do you mean? Like someone's going to pay us to go up and play?" anyway, Mike Rupp jumped on the opportunity, I guess, and kept himself in shape. But this is, to me, guys, it's like it's an entertainment thing. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Players that wear sanctioned gloves and the proper equipment for headgear and all that. But it'll be a show for sure. I know the Pat McAfee show had the whole gang on last week, and they're going to be doing a lot of promoting, went through WrestleMania. But this should be a pretty big event, and it'll be pretty interesting, certainly, to crown, King of the Ring, or King of the Rink. King of the
Rink! Yes! Hell yes!
Yeah.
This is great.
So, and it's going to be, guys, it's iwifights.com. We'll try to put a link on, but iwifights.com. And you can get all the information for the pay-per-view and that series of pay-per-views. So I'm excited about it. Get back into calling some live action that involves some form of hockey, I guess, without the puck. But I know we're going to have a little bit of fun here in the next month talking about it as we lead up to it. And I just want to thank everybody involved. Certainly Joe Watson for appreciating my broadcasting skills and giving me a referral. Thanks, Joe. You're the man, buddy.
And if you haven't seen the documentary, check it out. It's on Netflix. It's still there, and it's something else. It's called Untold Crime and Penalties, and it's one of the better hockey documentaries you're going to find out there.
You can't stop watching it, right?
It's
like
so
you put your
good.
eyes on it, you can't turn it off. So I agree with you, Anthony. Just tune into that, and we'll get you more info, some of the fight stuff as we approach the big date, and head out to Edmonton. I never thought I'd ever see Edmonton again in my life. Amazing. Coming back out to
you were kind of excited about that originally, though.
Well, I actually like the Western Canada. I lived in Calgary for a year, and great
Calgary,
people out there.
I like Calgary. I'm not saying I don't like Western Canada. I like Calgary, right? Calgary, I think, is a really cool town with all
Great
the
city.
with all the country kind of theme, and you got the Stampede that's out there. Like it's a really kind of happening. I like it. It's kind of like a happening little town. And then of course there's all the beautiful places out in Western Canada, like Banff, right? I mean, you've been to Banff, right, Bundy? I mean, that's just one of the most beautiful places out there, right? And of course, Vancouver's a really cool town if you go far west. I just didn't like Edmonton. I just thought Edmonton was kind of like plopped in the middle of all this beauty in Western Canada, and it's just like, oh.
Bundy, you know what's funny about that is
when he said the first show was in, and I'm like, please tell me that you guys are in Vegas.
I love the fact that Anthony just talked about something being plopped right between beauty, because I feel like that's kind of the video we've got going on right now as well. A thorn between two roses, if you will. Bundy, it's going to be really exciting. I cannot wait to hear you on the call, and I know that the Snow the Goalie listeners are going to be all in on your next venture here.
I appreciate it, guys. I know we'll have a lot of fun, and you guys will be very much part of this moving forward into the whole series. So it'll be a good time.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be fun. I mean, it's entertainment.
Sure.
And everybody's always wants to know who's the toughest guy in the rink. So they'll have these guys are trained pros.
And here's the thing, Bunny. And not a lot of people know this, right? So Russ sits all day for Crossing Broad, and he has to do all these betting stories and betting previews and preparing all these different cities to have their sports betting, legalized sports betting. But one of the things that Russ is really, really, really good at and doesn't. And Russ is one of those guys, pat himself on the back all the time, but he doesn't do this one publicly. And he should. He's like unbelievable at picking MMA. Like really, really good at picking the MMA fights. So we get Russ involved in this and start looking at this. Canada's starting to add. I think Ontario's got gambling now.
They sure do, Anthony.
Now.
You can read about that over on CrossingBroad.com. Bet365, who we work with, Caesars, BetMGM. Rivers is coming. I mean, come on now.
I bet you, that you're going to start to see IWI fights have some betting lines to them, and then maybe Russ can be a guy who can be one of those big touts for picking those fights up in Canada.
And I agree. And this is what's cool about it. It's a lot of fun, right? Like it's I mean, like Don Cherry used to say, hey, a couple of guys having a fight, nobody gets hurt. They go to the box there and have a couple beers after the game, right? That's what I think it is. But there's an entertainment part to it, and we'll see. It is at a casino, a native Canadian casino out in Edmonton. So. May 21st, guys. We'll be carrying you guys on that. I'm looking forward to it.
Of course, it's, the reason I'm so good at picking fights is because I was a fighter myself and also undefeated. So, there was that. Before we get out of here, we have a 5-star review. Of course, we haven't been shelling for these for a while, but we love when a 5-star review comes in. So by all means, go over to Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review. We love 5-star ratings. You can do that on Apple Podcasts and also on Spotify. If you pull up the Snow the Goalie page, right below the logo, you can hit the little star thing, leave 5 stars. We will love and cherish your positive feedback forever. Anyway, Chico's Bail Bonds Hockey from Apple Podcasts left a 5-star review. Said, epic podcast. Tremendous debt of gratitude for the folks behind this podcast and their unvarnished and direct analysis of the entire Flyers operation. This type of coverage has not been more needed at such a critical juncture of this once proud franchise, which is becoming a laughingstock of the league. Contrasted with all the Pravda-like propaganda machines, listening to and absorbing the takes offered by this group is truly refreshing, and what this long-suffering Flyers fan has been clamoring for. Keep it up. So thank you, Chico's Bail Bonds Hockey.
Thank you. So
there we go. Listen, we're going to be back next week with a new episode. Hope that this one comes across well. Hopefully the quality is a little bit better. People can feel warm and fuzzy listening to it. And then don't forget, over on the Crossing Broad YouTube channel, you can watch us. I don't know if it'll go up first this week like it did last week, but whatever. It'll be up there. If you want to watch us, you can, by all means, you can always listen to the podcast and then go back and watch it on the YouTube channel just for fun, just so you can watch us. Bundy laughs and Anthony kind of scowls at his computer from time to time, and that's what we're here for. All right. So thanks for tuning in. You can follow us all on Twitter at AntStainPhilly, at CTarian6, at JoyOnBroad, at Snow the Goalie. Also on Facebook.com/Snow the Goalie. By the way, Anthony mentioned sports betting being legal in Ontario now. If you're north of the border and you're in Ontario, go over to CrossingBroad.com. I've been writing about this quite a bit. Here's a funny quirk, guys. Canada does not allow, it's the Ontario Alcohol, and I forget what the other part of the board is, but whatever. They're the ones who set the restrictions on what people are allowed to advertise, and in a fun turn of events, we are not allowed to write about any of the offers for legal online sports books. So Caesars is currently available in Ontario. But the things that I write, I can write about what Caesars Sportsbook is, and I can write about the kinds of things you can bet on, but I can't tell you what their new user promo is. I can't even mention that they have a new user promo, but you can go there, you follow the link, you sign up. It makes me all happy, and it helps us out. So make sure you go check that stuff out over on CrossingBroad.com. So for Ant, for Bundy, I'm Russ. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening to Snow the Goalie, the only Flyers podcast.